Thousands of years ago, long before modern cities covered the earth, small groups of people searched for a place where they could build a permanent home. They found it beside a great river where water, fertile soil, and the changing seasons offered them a chance to survive and eventually to thrive. At first, there were only a few families. They built simple homes from mud, wood, and reeds. They raised animals, gathered food, and learned to depend on one another. Slowly, a temporary camp began to become a permanent settlement. Then came one of humanity's greatest discoveries: farming. The people learned that seeds planted in the rich soil could produce food year after year. Instead of constantly searching for their next meal, they could grow it themselves. As harvests became larger, the village grew. More children were born, more families arrived, and new skills began to appear. Some became farmers. Others became builders, potters, shepherds, or craftsmen. Everyone had a role in the growing community. Soon the people discovered that they could create even more by working together. Villages began trading with one another. Grain was exchanged for fish. Pottery was traded for tools. Cloth, animals, and other goods traveled from one community to another. Prosperity brought something new: great buildings. At the center of the settlement, workers began constructing a massive temple. Hundreds of people worked together, carrying bricks, shaping wood, and raising walls that would tower above their homes. The ancient people believed that powerful gods controlled the river, the rain, the harvest, and the changing seasons. Priests became important leaders, performing ceremonies and offering food and precious objects in the hope that the gods would protect their people. But farming beside a river was not always easy. The people needed to control the water, so they dug canals and created irrigation systems that carried the river into distant fields. With thousands of workers cooperating, the desert began to bloom. As the civilization grew, people needed a way to remember what they owned, what they traded, and what they owed. They began pressing symbols into wet clay with simple reeds. These marks became one of humanity's earliest forms of writing. Generations passed, and the small settlement became a great city. Massive walls surrounded thousands of homes. Temples dominated the skyline. Markets filled the streets, while farmers, craftsmen, merchants, priests, and rulers created a society more complex than anything their ancestors had known. The river became more than a source of water. It became a highway. Boats carried grain, pottery, textiles, metals, and other goods between distant communities. Trade connected the civilization to lands far beyond the river valley, but prosperity also attracted enemies. Powerful rulers needed soldiers to protect their cities, their farmland, and their wealth. Armies were organized, weapons were improved, and massive walls were built to defend the civilization. Eventually, peace gave way to war. Rival kingdoms fought over land, water, resources, and power. Across the dusty plains, armies marched toward one another, knowing that the future of entire cities could depend on the outcome of a single battle. War brought destruction. Buildings were damaged, markets fell silent, and families were forced to leave their homes. A city that had taken generations to build could be devastated in only a few days. Then, slowly, the people disappeared. Streets that had once been filled with voices became silent. Temples were abandoned. Houses collapsed. Sand and vegetation covered the remains. Yet the river continued to flow just as it had thousands of years before. Centuries passed. Then, long after the civilization had vanished, archaeologists began uncovering its remains. Beneath layers of earth, they discovered tools, pottery, statues, jewelry, and clay tablets covered with ancient writing. Through these discoveries, the forgotten people began to speak again. Their writing revealed their hopes, their beliefs, their struggles, their trade, and their everyday lives. The ruins were no longer just stones, they were evidence of millions of human stories. Civilizations rise, change, and eventually disappear. But the ideas people create can survive for thousands of years. The ancient river still flows, the ruins still stand, and their story reminds us that every great civilization begins with ordinary people who choose to build something together. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson left behind by the ancient world. Nothing lasts forever, but what humanity creates can echo through time.